Hey, noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today we are checking out Lex Fridman podcast again. And as you know, I've recently gone into a binge watch. I've been watching so many of his videos, it's insane. But today's video, I thought it was really interesting, and I really wanted to check it out with you because it's a conversation between Lex and Graham Hancock. I can never pronounce this name to save my life. And the title is Lost Civilization of the Ice Age, an Ancient Human History. And it's a massive 2 hours and 33 minutes and 1 second conversation. So this is really, really long, and it's not something that I can sit through in one go. And also, I kind of want to test it, if you will, because I don't know if you're interested in this. So what we're going to do today, we're going to start watching. We'll watch the intro. We'll watch the first segment. We'll provide commentary. And then we'll see how this goes. And then if you never once like it, I will, of course, produce more episodes. What my focus is here is that, of course, this is a little bit of a discussion about the possibility of a civilization which was advanced, which existed a long time before civilization as we know it. So generally speaking, when we talk about civilization, we talk about 10,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago. But of course, Mr. Hancock is actually presenting another theory, an hypothesis by which there was an advanced civilization. I don't know, advanced up to what point? I don't know if he's actually talking about technologically advanced even compared to us, and then something happened and then they die off, or if he means that they were advanced up to a certain, I don't know. So I want to see what you noble ones think. I want to hear Lex's commentary because there are plenty of people among my subscribers who are more intelligent and smarter than me, for sure.
The big question for me in that timeline is, why didn't we do it sooner? Why did it take so long? Why did we wait until after 12,000 years ago, really after 10,000 years ago, to start seeing the beginnings of civilization?
It's a good question. It's a fair question to ask.
The following is a conversation with Graham Hancock, a journalist and author who for over 30 years has explored the controversial possibility that there existed a lost civilization during the last ice age, and that it was destroyed in a global cataclysm some 12,000 years ago. He is the presenter of the Netflix documentary series Ancient Apocalypse, the second season of which has just been released. I'll do many more podcasts on history, including ancient history.
Please do. I'll
Our
watch them all.
distant past is full of mysteries, and I find it truly exciting to explore those mysteries with people both on the inside and the outside of the mainstream in the various disciplines involved. This is the Lex Fridman podcast. To support it, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, dear friends, here's Graham Hancock.
Let's hear it.
Let's
Very
start
excited.
with a big foundational idea that you have about human history.
Okay.
That there was an advanced ice age civilization that came before and perhaps seeded what people now call the six cradles of civilization: Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, China, Andes, and Mesoamerica. So let's talk about this idea that you have. Can you, at the highest possible level, describe it?
It would be better to describe it as a foundational sense of puzzlement and incompleteness in the story that we are taught about our past, which envisages more or less, there have been a few ups and downs, but more or less straightforward evolutionary progress. We start out as hunter-foragers, then we become agriculturalists.
Farmers, yeah.
The hunter-forager phase could go back hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where it's also important to mention that anatomically modern humans were not the only humans. We had
Yeah, of course, Neanderthal, Denisovan. It's an interesting point that he's bringing up. I think what his focus is going to be, if I have to predict it somewhat, would be the fact that why did it take hundreds of thousands of years? And it is puzzling to reach the hunter-gatherer / agricultural society and settled society, and then of course empires and kingdoms. And it is a very fair question. Why did it take that long? Let's see how he answers it.
Neanderthals from, 400,000 years ago to about 40,000 years ago.
Yeah.
They were certainly human because anatomically modern humans interbred with them, and we carry Neanderthal genes. There were the Denisovans, maybe 300,000 to perhaps even as recently as 30,000 years ago. And again, interbreeding took place. They're obviously a human species. So, we've got this background of humans who didn't look quite like us. And then we have anatomically modern humans. And I think the earliest
300K,
anatomically
200.
modern human skeletal remains are from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco and date to about 310,000
I should have
years
stuck
ago.
to 300.
So the question is, what were our ancestors doing after that? And I think we can include the Neanderthals and the Denisovans in that general picture.
Yeah.
And why did it take so long? This is one of the puzzles, one of the questions that bother me. Why did it take so long when we have creatures who are physically identical to us? We cannot actually weigh and measure their brains, but from the work that's been done on the crania, it looks like they had the same brains that we do with the same the same wiring. So if we've been around for 300,000 plus years at least, and if ultimately in our future was the process to create civilization or civilizations, why didn't it happen sooner? Why did it take so long? Why?
Maybe, I mean, not that I know the answer, of course, but I think the first thing that I would think, if we exclude any external intervention, which I imagine is going to bring up, the first thing that I would say is that the accumulation of collective generational knowledge takes a monumental amount of time in its beginnings. But once the ball starts running, then the growth of technological development becomes exponential. That's what I would think, because at the end of the day, that is how we evolve technologically now. So if you look at the last 500 years, at the last 1,000 years, which are, of course, a lot easier to document. This is another point that I might bring up again, depending on where it goes with this. But at the end of the day, we can easily document how the Romans evolved, how medieval people evolved, how certain technology evolved, and all the way, if you think about it, from a sword made of steel to quantum computers. How do you get that? How do you get from a painting to a phone? And with all the microtechnology and robotics that it includes. And the reality of fact is that, yes, it's generational collective knowledge in the sense that we build upon what has been discovered before. And I say collective because, of course, once you have the building of society, before that empires and kingdoms and tribes, the more collectivism you have, the more knowledge is shared, the more technology advances. In fact, unfortunately, historically speaking, there are two ways in which technological development is boosted. One is collectivism, sharing knowledge between multi-generational humans. And then the second, which is war. Because unfortunately, the threat of extinction and the threat of destruction, whether it be from a cataclysm or whether it be from other humans, it is in fact a massive boost when it comes to technology. And a lot of the technology we have initially developed as military technology. And I wish it wasn't the case, but it is the truth.
Why was it such a long time? Even the story of anatomically modern humans has kept on changing. I remember a time when it was said that there hadn't been anatomically modern humans before 50,000 years ago. And then it became 196,000 years ago with the findings in Ethiopia, and then 310,000 years ago. There's a lot of missing pieces in the puzzle there.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, though. Of course, it gets changing because we get more evidence. I mean, that's why I was mentioning earlier on, it's easier to document what happened 1,000 years ago than to document what happened 50,000 years ago.
But the big question for me in that timeline is, why didn't we do it sooner? Why did it take so long? Why did we wait until after 12,000 years ago, really after 10,000 years ago,
10.
to start seeing the beginnings, what are selected as the beginnings of civilization in places like Turkey, for example.
Fair question.
And then there's a relatively slow process of adopting agriculture, and by 6,000 years ago, we see ancient Sumer
Egypt,
emerging
Sumer
as a civilization. And we're then in the pre-dynastic period in ancient Egypt as well, 6,000 years ago, beginning to see definite signs of what will become the dynastic civilization of Egypt about 5,000 years ago. And interestingly, round about the same time, you have the Indus Valley civilization popping up out of nowhere. And by the way, the Indus Valley civilization was a lost civilization until the 1920s, when railway workers accidentally stumbled across some ruins. I've been to Harappa and Mohenjo-daro.
Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, man, that can get really controversial quick. I'm mentioning this. I don't know I don't know anything about Mr. Hancock. I've heard his name, of course, multiple times a long time ago. But and I'm very interested. I'm very open-minded. Okay, so I'm not one of those people that are like, no, you can't present any hypothesis that cannot be immediately confirmed, because I mean that would not be a lot of the stuff that we know in science and history was considered impossible, or they began as theories or hypotheses. So at the end of the day, I'm not against any. I'm happy to talk and discuss anything. I'm not going to shame anyone for if they. Of course, if someone says aliens did it, then it's not like I'm going to say no, they didn't. But I'm going to say you're going to need to provide. We need to prove it. But I'm open to the possibility of anything. Of course, I'm not saying that's what he's saying. Just to tell you where I stand when it comes to these form of theory.
And these are extraordinarily beautifully centrally planned cities. Clearly they're the work of an already sophisticated civilization. One of the things that strikes me about the Indus Valley civilization is that we find a steatite seal of an individual seated in a recognizable yoga posture. And that seal is 5,000 years old. And the yoga posture is Mula Bandhasana, which involves a real contortion of the ankles and twisting the feet back. It's an advanced yoga posture. So there it is 5,000 years ago. And that then raises the question, well, how long did yoga take to get to that place when it was already so advanced 5,000 years ago? What's the background to this? China, the Yellow River civilization. Again, it's around about the same period, 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. You get these first signs of something happening. So it's very odd that all around the world, we have this sudden upsurge of civilization about 6,000 years ago, preceded by what seems like a natural evolutionary process that would lead to a civilization, and yet certain ideas being carried down and manifested and expressed in many of these different civilizations. I just find that whole idea very puzzling and very disturbing, especially when I look at this radical break that takes place in not just the human story, but the story of all life on Earth, which was the last great cataclysm that the Earth went through, which was the Younger Dryas event. It was an extinction level event. That's when all the great megafauna of the Ice Age went extinct. It's after that. It's after that event that we start seeing this, what are taken to be the beginnings of the first gradual steps towards civilization. We come out of the Upper Paleolithic as it's defined, the old end of the Old Stone Age, and into the Neolithic. Yeah. And that's when the wheels are supposedly set in motion to start civilization rolling.
So, is there a causal link between a mass extinction level event and the beginning of human civilization? That is a very interesting perspective. Fascinated to see how he's going to connect the two.
But what happened before that, and why did that suddenly happen then? And I can't help feeling, and I've felt this for a very long while, that there are major missing pieces in our story.
Yeah,
it's
sure,
often
of
said
course.
That I'm
yeah.
claiming to have proved that there was an advanced lost civilization in the Ice Age. And I am not claiming to have proved that.
Appreciate that.
That is a hypothesis that I am putting forward to answer some of the questions that I have about prehistory. And I think it's worthwhile to inquire into those possibilities, because the Younger Dryas event was a massive global cataclysm, whatever caused it. And it's strange that just after it, we start seeing these first signs.
So the current...
Of course, it could be strange because we don't understand why it happened, or it could be strange because there are reasons as to why it happened that we don't have enough data to even be able to imagine. It is, however, important to say that it's true that prehistory is puzzling, because it's a puzzle, though. So I wouldn't say it's strange that we don't understand that. I wouldn't use strange in connection to the idea of, oh, this is so difficult to put together. Why is this happening? It's so long ago that it really becomes strange to be able to understand it, if anything. And putting things together is extremely difficult. Now, the proposal of an advanced Ice Age civilization is fascinating. I love this kind of stuff. I really, really like it. Now, to convince someone like me, not that he has to, I mean nothing, of course. But still, as someone who's watching, to convince me, you need a lot of proof. But to entertain the idea, you don't. You just need to present the hypothesis. At that point, I'll be more than happy to review whatever data you present. But I am pedantic, so there is that.
Current understanding in mainstream archaeology is that after the Younger Dryas is when the civilizations popped up in different places of the globe with a lot of similarities, but they popped up independently.
Yeah, independently and by coincidence. And by coincidence, those big civilizations that we all remember as the first civilizations, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley Civilization, China, they all pop up at pretty much the same time. That is the mainstream view. Yeah.
And they don't just pop up; they kind of build up gradually. First, there's some settlements.
Oh, definitely, yes.
And then there's different dynamics of how they build up, and the role of agriculture in that is also non-obvious, but it's just there's first a kind of settlement, a stabilization of where the people are living, then they start using agriculture, then they start getting urban centers and that kind of stuff.
It seems like an entirely reasonable argument. Everything about that makes sense. There is no doubt that you're seeing evolutionary progress, social evolution taking place in those thousands of years before Sumer emerges. But what's happening now, really, I spent much of the 90s and the late 1980s investigating this issue of a lost civilization. I wrote a series of books about it. But by 2002, when I published a book called Underworld, which was the most massive and most heavy book that I've ever written because I was writing very defensively at the time. By the time I finished that book, my wife Santha and I spent 7 years scuba diving all around the world looking for structures underwater, often led by local fishermen or local divers.
Hey, that sounds like a video game quest right there. I would totally do that in a video game. This guy actually did it for real. So I appreciate people that, get their hands dirty, or should I say wet in this case,
to anomalies that they'd seen underwater. By the time that book was finished, I thought, actually, I've done this story. I've walked the walk. I really don't have much more to say about it. And I turned in another direction, and I wrote a book called Supernatural: Meetings with the Ancient Teachers of Mankind, recently retitled Visionary. And that was fundamentally about the role of psychedelics in the evolution of human culture. And I didn't think that I would go back to the lost civilization issue. But Göbekli Tepe in Turkey kept on forcing itself upon me. The more and more discoveries there, the 11,600-year date from Enclosure D, which has the two largest megalithic pillars. And I reached a point where I realized I have to get back in the water, and I have to investigate this again. And Göbekli Tepe was a game changer, but I think it's a game changer for everything, because Göbekli Tepe, the extraordinary...
I have no idea what this is, by the way. I know nothing about this specific archaeological finding, so of course I am not able to double check or verify anything he's saying from this second onward. Because when it comes to overall beginning of civilization, prehistory, I've done my studies, but this, no idea. So do keep this as we listen. We might need to do our own verification, and apart from using critical thinking.
Ordinary nature of it. We're looking at a major megalithic site, which is at least 5,500 years older than, say, Gigantea in Malta, which was previously considered to be the oldest megalithic site in the world. And this led, of course, to a huge amount of interest and attention, both from the Turkish government, who see the tourism potential of having the world's oldest megalithic site, and from archaeologists. And this, in turn, has led to exploration and excavation throughout the region. And what they're finding throughout that whole region around Göbekli Tepe, and going down into Syria and further down into the Jordan Valley as far as Jericho, and even across a bit of the Mediterranean into Cyprus, is what Turkish archaeologists are now calling the Tas Tepeler civilization. They're calling it a civilization, the Stone Hills civilization, with very definite identifying characteristics, semi-subterranean circular structures.
Okay, this sounds fascinating to me. And I think it's also an opportunity to introduce one point that I always like to present, which is this. You know how much on this channel I fight the rewriting of history. Do keep in mind, and I've said this a few times, but I think the more I say it, the better. rewriting of history is the way we write history, as long as you do it based on new evidence and not based on ideology or politics. So it is important to say that when we fight the political rewriting of history, the ideological rewriting of history, the false rewriting of history, that's what you're doing. You want evidence, you don't want feelings. But the idea of rewriting history is fine when new evidence comes to light. So if we believe, just to give one example, that loriga segmentata as a form of armor utilized by Roman soldiers was only used for 300 years, starting a little bit like 20, 30 years before Christ, and then all the way up to 300 years after Christ, Anno Domini. But then we find a loriga segmentata and it's correctly dated to 5th century before Christ, then we are rewriting history, but we're doing it the correct way, and there is nothing wrong with that. So, just an important point. I enjoy when new discoveries are presented that could shed light and help us rearrange our understanding of the past, whether it be local to a specific area, there's megalithic structures, or whether it be at a global level. But it needs to be done right. So let's have a look how this continues.
The use of T-shaped megalithic pillars, sometimes not anywhere near as big as those at Göbekli Tepe. It's clear that Göbekli Tepe now was not the beginning of this process. It was actually, in a way, the end of this process.
Refined.
It was the summation of everything that Stonehill's civilization had achieved. But what is becoming clear is that this is a period before the foundation of Göbekli Tepe. As far as we know, that date of 11,600 years ago is the oldest date for Göbekli Tepe. But of course, there's a lot of Göbekli Tepe still underground. Mm-hmm. So we can't say for sure that that's the oldest, but it's the oldest so far excavated. What we're seeing is that in that whole region around there something was in motion, and it began to go into motion round about the beginning of the Younger Dryas. And this is where these two dates are really important. The Younger Dryas, I'll round the figures off, begins around 12,800 years ago, and it ends around 11,600 years ago. So Göbekli Tepe's construction date, if it is 11,600 years ago, if they don't find older materials, marks the end of the Younger Dryas. But the beginning of the Younger Dryas, we're already seeing the stirrings of the kind of culture that manifests in full form at Göbekli Tepe. And after the construction of Göbekli Tepe, in fact, even during the construction of Göbekli Tepe, we see agriculture beginning to be adopted. The people who created Göbekli Tepe were all hunter-foragers at the beginning. But by the time Göbekli Tepe was finished, and it was definitely, deliberately finished, closed off, closed down, deliberately buried, covered with earth, covered with rubble, and then topped off with a hill, which is why Göbekli Tepe is called what it is. Göbekli Tepe means pot-bellied hill, or the hill of the navel.
That's an interesting point.
For a long time, Göbekli Tepe was thought to be just a hill.
Okay, so if the people that built it eventually, so they begin as hunter-gatherers, then they build this thing, and then they switch to farmer, settler populations with agriculture, and then they cover it up. Am I understanding that right? Well, that could be the reason could be a power shift in the political. I mean, we have seen this happen. I don't know if that there is any indication. Of course, you need an indicator to point to that. But it could be that it was like if there is a massive change in the power dynamics and the people in power, sometimes if even a megalithic structure, even massive buildings are perceived as a connection to the past and a connection to a previous type of ruling elite, which is still perceived as a threat, these will be hidden, destroyed, and taken apart. Not the case here, but he says hidden, so it's interesting.
Looked a bit like a potbelly.
Can you say how it was discovered? I think this is one of the most fascinating things on Earth, period. So maybe can you say what it is and how it was discovered?
Please.
Well, Göbekli Tepe is, first of all, the oldest fully elaborated megalithic site that we know of anywhere in the world. It doesn't mean that older ones won't be found,
of course,
but it is the oldest so far found. The part of the site that's been excavated, which is a tiny percentage of the whole site, we do know. My first visit to Göbekli Tepe was in 2013, and Dr. Klaus Schmidt, the late Dr. Klaus Schmidt, who died a year later, was very generous to me and showed me around the site for over a period of 3 days. And he explained to me that they've already used ground-penetrating radar on the site, and they know that there's much more Göbekli Tepe still underground. So anything is possible in terms of the dating of Göbekli Tepe. But what we have at the moment is a series of almost circular, but not quite circular enclosures, which are walled with relatively small stones, and then inside them you have pairs of megalithic pillars.
Look at that!
And the archetypal part of that site,
Drywall construction, it seems,
is enclosure D, which contains the two largest upright megaliths, about 18 feet tall and reckoned to weigh somewhere in the range of 20 tons, if I have my memory correct. They're substantial, hefty pieces of stone. It isn't some kind of extraordinary feat to create a 20-foot tall or 20-ton megalith, nor is it an extraordinary feat to move it. There's nothing magical or really weird about that. Human beings can do that and always have. Besides, the quarry for the megaliths is right there. It's
there, yeah.
within
The Romans did that a lot. Like a lot of the building of Parisi, or the expansion building of Parisi, which is Lutetia, the Romans called, so Paris. Once the original Celtic Parisi becomes Roman, and then they rename it into Lutetia, and then they start building it even more, expand, and build in stone. They literally got it from quarries underneath the ground, and then so that they would limit transportation problems, which of course they did do it. The Romans were famous for moving marble from some quarries all the way to the other side, sometimes just because they wanted a certain chromatic variety of marble, as well as other stones. But yeah, that's something that people did, the Romans did, so it doesn't surprise me that they located an area and said, okay, we're building right here.
meters of the main enclosures. So that's not a mystery. But the mystery is why suddenly this new form of architecture, this massive megalithic pillars appear.
Concentration of wealth, maybe? Spoils of war? New trade with other civilizations, perhaps? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, any form of statuary architecture that is imposing but doesn't have a military function usually comes from an overabundance of riches, which oftentimes means someone took it from someone else.
And the pillars, one of the things that interests me about the pillars is their alignment, and there is good work that's been done which suggests that enclosure D aligns to the rising of the star Sirius, and the rising points of the star Sirius appear to be mapped by the other enclosures, which are all oriented in slightly different directions.
Man, astronomy, the understanding of the ancients when it comes to astronomy, whether it be the Egyptians with the pyramids, whether it be, as we're learning this, it's always so fascinating to me, because it's a mysterious thing to really figure out how did they figure all of this out. It's crazy.
It was the work entirely of hunter-foragers, but by the time Göbekli Tepe was completed, agriculture was being introduced and was taking place there. Now, you asked how Göbekli Tepe was found. The answer to that is that there was a survey of that pot-bellied hill in the 1960s by some American archaeologists, and they were absolutely looking for Stone Age material, for material from the Paleolithic, and they had found some Paleolithic flints, upper Paleolithic flints around there, so it looked like a good place to look.
Sure.
But then they noticed, sticking out of the side of the hill, some very finely cut stone, bits of very large and very finely cut stone. And looking at that, the workmanship was so good that those archaeologists were confident that it had nothing to do with the Stone Age. And they thought they were looking at perhaps some Byzantine remains.
I wonder why, though, because at the end of the day, once again, the Stone Age was so long that the idea that you wouldn't have skilled craftsmen with stone is counterintuitive. If you have tens of thousands of years, maybe even longer. But let's imagine a civilization that has a certain continuity. And if we don't want to call it civilization for obvious reasons, let's just call it a tribal unity. And they have a continuity. They don't get destroyed. They thrive, they prosper for a very long period of time, and for like 90,000 years. You don't think they're gonna learn how to work that stone masterfully? I very much think so. With like father to son, specialized people. Then as they organize, they have people that just do that generationally, which is how, for example, castles in Japan are built. It's by generational workers, like the fathers and grandfathers that were always doing that, and they had sometimes even secretly guarded techniques that, and then they would be paid and employed by governments to take care of what their specialty was. So no, it doesn't surprise me. I would have disagreed with those archaeologists on the spot.
And they abandoned the site and never looked at it further. And it wasn't until the German Archaeological Institute got involved, and particularly...
even if it was Byzantine, I mean, wouldn't that be extremely valuable anyways? Why would they abandon it?
Klaus Schmidt, who I think was a genius, had real insight into this and started to dig at Göbekli Tepe, that they realized what they'd found, that they'd found potentially the oldest megalithic site in the world. And they'd found it at a place where agriculture, according to the established historical timeline, that's where agriculture, at any rate in Europe and Western Asia, begins. It begins in Anatolia, in Turkey, and then it gradually disseminates westward from there.
Yeah. And yet the understanding is it was created by hunter-gatherers.
It was created by hunter-gatherers, yeah. There was no agriculture 11,600 years ago in Göbekli Tepe. But by the time Göbekli Tepe was decommissioned, and I use that word deliberately, was closed down and buried, agriculture was all around it. And this was agriculture of people who knew how to cultivate plants.
Do we have an understanding when it was turned into if I could say, a time capsule? So protected by forming a mound around it. Is it around that similar time?
It stood from roughly 11,600 years ago to about 10,400 years ago, to about 8,400 BC. So around 1,200 years, it was there, and it continued to be elaborated as a site. And while it was being elaborated as a site, we see agriculture, I'm going to use the word, being introduced. There'd been no sign of it before, and suddenly it's there. And to me, that's another of the mysteries about Göbekli Tepe. And then with the new work that's being done, we realize that it's part of a much wider phenomenon, which spreads across an enormous distance. The puzzling thing is that after Göbekli Tepe, there almost seems to be a decline. Things fall down again. And then we enter this long, slow process of the Neolithic, thousands of years, gradual developments until we come to ancient Sumer and Mesopotamia. But agriculture has taken a firm root by then. Actually, one other thing, I'll just say this in passing. When I talk about a lost civilization introducing ideas to people, I'm often accused of stealing credit from the indigenous people who had those ideas in the first place. Nonsense. So I do find it slightly hypocritical that archaeology fully accepts that the idea of agriculture was introduced to Western Europe from Turkey, and that Western Europeans didn't invent agriculture. It was absolutely introduced by Anatolian farmers who traveled west. So the notion of dissemination of ideas perhaps shouldn't be so annoying to archaeologists as it is.
I agree. I mean, who cares? Once again, we're going to talk about feelings over facts. I agree with him when it comes to this statement. I imagine you would know that. The truth is the truth. So if what he's saying is correct, and the agricultural capability was introduced to these people by another civilization, it is what it is. You're not taking anything away from the natives if it's the truth. The only way in which I would agree with anyone complaining, I imagine he got that sort of complaint, of course, that's what it sounds like, is if this was said as the truth, even though they're lying about it. Then yeah, sure. Then you're removing something from locals and natives, regardless of whatever color they are, who cares? I mean, you're doing it through a lie for your own reasons. Then yeah, absolutely. You're taking away an achievement from the natives, and you're doing it through subterfuge. Yeah, that's what you should complete. That's why people lose the target. People lose focus these days. Oh, it's disrespectful. But if that's true, it's the truth, who cares? Would you rather hide the truth so you're not offensive? No, I wouldn't want you to hide the truth. If someone tells me, I don't get offended, the ancient Romans being my ancestors, I don't get offended when we find out that it was the Gauls that most likely invented the Roman mail armor that is so famous and associated with the Romans. I don't get offended when we find that out. Am I going to, oh no, Varro actually calls it Gallica. Does that mean that the Gauls made it? Okay, guys, let's hide it because it's disrespectful towards my ancestors. Who cares? It's disrespectful towards the truth. That's the only thing I care about. Anyways, we watched the first 2 entire segments for the first 20 minutes of the video, and I'm going to stop it here. Of course, if this seems really interesting, that do to you, it is to me, do click the link in the description to watch the full episode. And if this video does well, we get a lot of views, we get a lot of comments, we get a lot of likes, you guys like it, you share it, and you want me to continue, we'll check out the next 2 segments, which are called Early Humans and Astronomical Symbolism. Oh, that's going to be nice. And then the impact hypothesis. Oh, this is going to be good. It might connect to my video dedicated to Sodom and Gomorrah and the impact. I do have a... Yeah, that could be a really, really nice episode too. So for now, thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Lex Fridman. And thank you, Dr. Mr., I don't know, Graham Hancock. And most importantly, thanks to all of you. And I will see you tomorrow. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.